We're going to get started with successful sales calls in the program office. If you don't know me, I'm Neil McDonald. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my daily federal sales training here on LinkedIn Live, where I teach process and procedures for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. When you follow the process A to Z, you achieve the outcome or the success you're looking for. In our case, sometimes that might be an actual sale. Often, though, it's just one step forward in the sales lifecycle. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Today, we're going to focus on talking about how to have successful calls when you're reaching out to federal agency program office people. Before we get started, though, do me a favor, help buyers and me remember who you are. Put your company name in the chat. Use 2 or 3 words to describe your core competency. It makes it so much easier for me and buyers to remember who you are, but it also helps people who are in the chat remember who you are out there. So I like that. Office design and furnishing. Kevin Richards, that's pretty straightforward. Gus Phelps, you do audio and visual good. I would say you do audio and visual well. No, thank you. He's just letting me know my audio and visual is good. I'm excited. It's Friday. Today is the 19th. By the way, I love dropping dates into my content so you can see when I originally created this content, this training, because it is designed to be evergreen, meaning it lasts for a while. It doesn't get old. It's, if you follow the guidance, you're on track. Okay, so we're going to dive into the meat of today's training. I'm going to cover a couple of things. First, I just want to start at a high level. What do I mean when I say successful sales call? And then the second thing I want to cover is telling you about how solid research is going to make you look so good to the buyer. Third thing we're going to talk about are what questions you can ask that drive discussion, right? So it's not specifically the question, but the type of questions that will help discussion happen within your meetings instead of making them really choppy. And then the last thing I want to wrap up with is give you a tip on how pre-meetings can help you have such a powerful and successful sales call when you get in there for the main meeting. So that's what we're going to cover in the next 25 minutes or so. So let's get started with what's the difference between a successful call and a great call? Most of us who have had meetings have had great meetings. We go in and everybody clicks, right? They like me, I like them. We were able to share our deck. They say they love what we're talking about. In sales, to me, that is called a great meeting. It's not a meeting I want. I want a successful meeting. A successful meeting is one that moves the sale forward. So when you think about your sale, you should have in your sales pipeline 4, 5, 6 stages, right? Those are major movements forward in the sales cycle. But inside of each stage, let's say I'm in the pursuit stage of an opportunity, there are 10, 20, 30 different tasks I can do in there that show me movement towards the next stage in the capture lifecycle. So I describe successful sales meetings as ones that actually move the sale forward. A very easy example with a teaming partner meeting is that you get an NDA. Right? You say, hey, we get an agreement to get an NDA in place. We agree to do that, and we're doing it. Another really good small example of moving the sale forward is an agreement, a scheduling, not an agreement, and we schedule right then and there before we get off the call to meet again, right? It's not enough to say, hey, let's meet again. No, I agree. Let's meet in a couple of weeks. Let's follow back up. That's a great meeting. My friend Tim and I do this all the time. We don't let ourselves get off the call. We have regular meetings, but we don't let ourselves get off the call unless we sit there and schedule the next meeting. If it's not scheduled, it's not going to happen, right? And all sorts of excuses will come up why, and they're all legitimate. You want to have a successful call, schedule a meeting. So that's a really good one. One last example for a program office is to get a copy of a document. Say you're trying to get your hands on a PWS, an old PWS even, or strategic plan. If you get them to agree to take that as an action item, they're going to get it for you. That's a good, successful call forward. So the last tip about the difference between a great meeting and a successful meeting is that a successful sales meeting has a stated objective that you're meeting. I said the NDA, for example. So when I go into that meeting, I have already told my colleagues, whoever, right, that my stated objective for this meeting is to get an NDA agreed to or signed or started with Booz Allen, as an example, right? My stated objective is to get them to get me a copy of the PWS that I can't find from the Navy, right? Those are stated objectives. And when you do your call planning, that's when you create a stated objective. So let's talk really quick about why successful calls are so important, right? It seems like it might be obvious, but I just want to state the obvious, because sometimes when we remember the obvious and we state it out loud, we're like, oh yeah, that is obvious, but I haven't really been tracking on it. So one example of why, or one reason why successful calls are vital and they're important to you, is that they'll shape, when you get in there and you can have a successful sales call with a program office, you can shape their thinking on long range opportunities. And an example might be a really drastic example is, let's say they're in there and they're using Microsoft Cloud services. What I want to do is to get in and start shaping their thoughts to say, why don't you get over to Amazon Web Services, a complete competitor, right? I'm using a very, very drastic thinking. You can bring it down into much smaller, easier to take. But if I want them to switch over to Amazon, which is what I sell, then I need to get in there and have these relationships and successful calls to be able to have the influence on that agency to get them to see that if you switch to Amazon, you could cut costs by 50% or something. I don't know what the facts are there, but that's my argument, right? So shaping the thinking on long range opportunities means you're shifting your influence to the left of the life cycle, the procurement life cycle the government's going through. The next one is you can hear about opportunities that are planned but not budgeted, right? Not forecasted. You can look at a forecast and see opportunities. That's one thing. But there's another thing to be able to have a relationship and get in and have a successful sales call with somebody just pause really quick. Somebody in the program office. Often, if you're looking at a branch chief or a division chief, section chief, whatever they're called, you can look at a wall and you can almost look at a 5 or 10 year planning strategy roadmap that they have. And you can begin to see what they're talking about. Maybe, we need to add a wing to this hospital. People are just talking about it. I'm going to throw it on my roadmap for now. Well, if you're able to get in and have successful sales calls with program office personnel, you begin to learn about these opportunities as early as possible. Again, this goes back to this idea of shifting left in the process. And I'm actually going to make it a little hard on Gus. I know I have a whole training video out there about shifting to the left, right? So you want to find that. Maybe he can drop that number in a minute. Number 3 is you can perform capture tasks. When you're having successful calls within a program office, capture is all about learning what are their challenges, what are their goals, right? When you're trying to write a proposal and shape win themes or think about the solutioning, all of that comes from the capture activity of truly understanding a customer, understanding their needs, understanding the challenges they face. What did they do in the last contract that they wish they could have put into the requirements, those kind of things. So when you get into a program office, the value of having successful calls means you can perform those capture tasks and start checking them off so opportunities move through your life cycle. Another one that I really like, value for going in and having successful calls, because again, successful calls almost always lead to good relationships, right? It's going to be hard to not have a relationship with somebody who's willing to do stuff with you. So the 4th one is learning about selection board members. And so basically what it means is when you submit a proposal, a bunch of people are going to look at it. Those people I call, and different people call it at different times, selection board. They might be called something else. But basically the evaluation board, selection board, these are the people who are going to read your pricing, your technical proposal content, and make a decision for the government on their review of it. The more you can know who those people are, the more you can at least learn their thinking so you can shape your proposal to their thinking. But if you're lucky, you can get in there and actually have meetings with them and begin to understand their needs and shape your proposals based on that need that you're hearing. So, this idea of getting in and having a successful meeting, when you have successful meetings, you begin to get more information than you originally even were looking at. And a selection board, to me, is one of the ultimate capture tasks that you can achieve on an opportunity, because you begin to see who's going to evaluate your proposal. The last one I want to just tell you is it'll get you more meetings. When you have successful meetings and you do successful sales calls into a program office, you begin to learn about who else is in that office. Who else should I meet with to talk to? I talked about selection board, right? But there's also just people doing the work. Can we talk to Janie? Can we talk to Johnny? and learn about what they're doing. If I talked about cloud technology, I might talk with Janie, who's in charge of application development on cloud. What do you like about Microsoft on cloud apps? What do have you ever used Amazon? Do you know anything about Amazon? That kind of example I was using earlier. Well, when you have successful meetings, the likelihood of you having introductions to other people within that office, and sometimes program office could be 100 plus people, right? So we're not talking about inside of an office with 5 people, which would be great. But we're talking about offices that might have 100, 200 people in there. You want to get introductions. At the very least, you want to know who they are. And when you have successful calls, you increase the likelihood of that. So if it's making sense when I'm talking about this value for having successful calls, if it makes sense, the difference between a great call and a successful call, throw successful into the chat. Gives me a second to have water, but it also gives me a minute to understand whether you're tracking on what I'm saying. Okay, so let's move on. While you're putting successful into the chat, if it makes sense to you, let's talk about solid research and how it can make you look good to the buyer. So what I mean by solid research is really just showing that you've done the homework. This is almost one of the reasons I started the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, or the way I shaped it was, I remember when I was a small business owner, I used to get told all the time, the advice you would get from experts is you got to do your homework on an agency. I'm like, cool. How do I do my homework? And it's like, I began to understand a lot of people will tell us what to do, and not many will tell us how. And so what I'm telling you here is, when you do your research, and I'm going to give you examples of how you can do that research. When you do your research, you've done your homework. There's this line out there that buyers don't care what you know until they know that you care. Buyers don't care what you know until they know that you care. And one way to show that you care is do your research, do your homework on their agency, their office, their mission, etc. So you can begin with strategic plans. These are put out by all agencies. Download them. If you're looking for a lot of them, just go to my profile. I put them out almost every single week, and certainly several times a week. I'm putting out different agencies' strategic plans so that you don't have to find them. You just hit that bell notification, you'll be notified of them. But strategic plans are filled with a ton of information. The next one are annual reports. Annual reports talk about what we did last year. That's the big thing. And what I look for in there, in particular, as it relates to preparing for a program office meeting, is what were you hoping to do last year that you didn't get done? Sometimes that information is inside of an annual report, and it's great because I can then begin to ask them, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but I can ask questions around this idea of, you were hoping to get this done, you didn't. Any particular reason? Was it just because of COVID, or was it because of technical challenges? Whatever it was. Next one is industry day slides, right? Industry days are when the government comes out and briefs us in the industry. And some agencies do a fantastic job. Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane, gets my highest award for putting out the most content in the most thorough way with the most numbers, names, numbers, and emails in there. Fantastic. There's other people, Leslie Faircloth and her team do a great job over there too. But these guys, these industry day slides and briefings provide you a ton of information to understand what are they trying to do, right? What have they been doing? Where are they going? Sometimes they give you 5-year outlooks on each one of their major programs. So take a look at those for your program office when you're setting up a meeting. The last thing I want you to do on research is build your own org chart. You can start with a government generated org chart, but build your org chart around the program offices or the agencies you're trying to sell to. The most important reason to understand this is PEO Digital, for example, is in the Navy. Understanding who is their upper command, what kind of PEO is Program Executive Office. And so there's programs or projects under PEO Digital. What are those? If you're meeting with somebody from this one here, how do they relate to these other 3 or 4 over here? Well, when you have an org chart, you can have that conversation a lot more intelligently with the person you're talking to. And if you want to get a referral, you already know the names, et cetera, of the offices, maybe even of the people. So I want to give you one quick example, and I do want to be quick on this because I just know I'm going through time. But I had an intern that I taught this process about, and in fact, I do this in the workshop now, visibility, targeting, outreach to build relationships, right? And if you looked at, let me just pull this up really quick so you know what I'm talking about. So if you look at this, visibility, targeting, and outreach lead to relationships. And as you go around, relationships will deliver opportunities, which allow you to write proposals, which allow you to win sales and do more relationships, right? It's a circular process. You follow the process, you'll be unbelievably successful, depending on your efforts. And so the visibility, targeting, outreach, though, I want you to pay attention to this part as I'm telling this particular story, is that I taught an intern how to do this process and how to do research. Research is the very first thing you do before you start reaching out to somebody, doing that outreach. And the research this person did was on strategic plans, on annual reports, but then they began to just do a little bit extra work, still within the time constraint I gave them. And they were finding all these other documents. The point was, when they went to have a meeting, and this person was a very young intern having a meeting with a small business professional on their own, the conversation easily could have gone from, well, I'm superior and I'm in the government kind of thing, to you're just a kid or whatever, right? But within minutes, it instantly shifted to a peer-to-peer conversation where the government small business professional respected this intern for the knowledge they brought and their obvious preparation. It went from a kind of a subordinate, superior type of relationship in this meeting to a peer-to-peer, to then the intern gained control of the meeting. And when I say control, everywhere they wanted the meeting to go, the guidance I had given them, they were able to walk, because they started talking about documentation inside that agency that this person wasn't even aware of, but they were really interested in what it was. And so all of a sudden they started looking to them, not as a superior, right? But as somebody who they were really beginning to develop respect for within a matter of 15, 20 minutes because of what they brought to the table, which then enabled that whole thing to go out to other relationships, other meetings. Yes, I'll go get you stuff. And it all came back to, and I'm saying this a lot, right, the story, but it came back to having solid research made this intern look great at DLA was the agency, but it could do the same for you, right? When you do proper research, you're going to look good because you'll demonstrate that you care about them first before you start making them know about you and care about you. So if you see the value of research and how it can give you control of a meeting, go ahead and put research in the chat. We're going to cruise through. By the way, as I get ready to go into the next last two topics here, if you haven't been here before, I definitely do fire hose training. I hope it makes sense. I look for you to grab a topic, but make sure you're engaging in the chat as well. Okay, so let's get into the what questions can drive the discussion, right? I talk about how research can line you up to look good, but you want to drive the discussion. When you're in with a program office, it's not, so I use something called spin selling. Spin selling, SPIN, stands for situation questions, problem questions, implication questions, and need payoff questions. I have a whole training video just on that for 30 minutes. It's training video number 85, and it might be dropped into chat by somebody in a minute. But training video number 85 goes into what I'm saying here in a much longer time. But spin selling, situational questions are factual questions. You really don't want to be asking any of them with the program office if you don't have to, because they are yes and no, basically. How many users do you have? 50. There's no driving the discussion with 50, right? Or 500 or 5,000. And so you want to focus on these two questions called problem questions and implication questions. And so your problem questions are designed to uncover their challenges, their pains, the problem that your product or service is the solution to. You don't want to talk about your solution. You want to talk about the problem, because even though you understand the solution fixes a problem, they might not even know they have the problem. Excuse me. So asking these problem questions enables you to sit there and get them on the same page that yes, they have the problem. Yes, they need to solve it. Problem questions are driven by the research you do. When you do research, you're going to understand some of their challenges. There's also problem questions you can ask, let's say around data. If I was in the data analytics side or data science side, I might ask a problem question around data sources. For those of you who are not in the data space, the government keeps data about you, about me, about their mission. They keep it in many different places, many different silos. And what they're struggling to do is to bring all that data together and turn it into information so that leaders can make decisions, basically, right? And so I might start asking them problem questions about, you know, how well are you able to pull together all the data resources, right? I'm trying to get them to talk about, well, we can get 3 or 4 of them, but man, a bunch of them are just wild, wild west and they're hard. And then the implication question, very quickly, because this is not teaching about spin, but I just want to point out, you want to ask problem questions and implication questions. My question that's an implication question means who else is being impacted by this? And so when I ask them that question, I might ask something like, well, if you're not able to bring the data together, you can't pull it together to process and manage, but who uses the data that you would bring together? Like, who would be impacted negatively or positively if you can't get all that data together? And I'm trying to get them to say, well, this mission set would be impacted. You know, these people are trying to do something. And that's why I want to ask problem and implication questions with the program office, because they will tell us through their answers both the challenges they're facing and they'll allude to the goals they're trying to achieve. And that's why you want to do that. I know it's a lot there. If you'd like to have us drop something in, I think we already did on preparing the right questions. And Gus, we've got training back way earlier on spin selling too. But and actually, I got training on YouTube. But if you get what I'm saying about asking problem questions, right, and how they can drive the discussion, and getting the customer to uncover their own needs through these problem questions, if that makes sense, and if you understand the overall idea of spin, put in just spin into the chat. If you'd like to learn more about it, if you'd like to see me expand more on the training around spin, just say more spin, and I'll get to that. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of, and I'm just really thirsty. Sorry. I swear it's not just me trying to fire my guns drinking the water. Okay, so pre-meetings. I want to introduce you to this concept of pre-meetings in case you haven't ever tried it. If I have a meeting with a branch chief, right, whatever that position is, sounds pretty high. If I have a meeting with a branch chief, I want you to keep in mind this idea of having a pre-meeting, and I'm going to talk to you about what they are and then what's the value of them. The first thing is what they are. An example of a pre-meeting is if I'm meeting with a branch chief, meeting with their direct reports, 2 or 3 of their direct reports or something ahead of time, that's a pre-meeting. I'm meeting with these people to try to understand what they might be communicating upstream as challenges, what they might have as wishes, but maybe they're not that good communicating it upstream, and it aligns to what I sell. Well, having those kind of meetings will allow me to gather that information. I'm doing more of my homework, but here I'm doing homework with a pre-meeting, right? And so the way you get pre-meetings is you can reach out directly to these direct reports, or what I like to do is when I schedule a meeting with a branch chief like this, I might say, hey, and this goes into the second one, but I might say, can you give me your direct reports, a couple of them, and let me know who they are so that I can talk with them and understand their challenges and goals before I meet with you. So that way I'm able to kind of communicate a lot more effectively. And this goes into the second tip I have on who to meet with. You can have a pre-meeting with the very person you're going to meet. And the way I do this in sales is I'll schedule a meeting with this branch chief. It might take forever for me to get it, but I get it. I scheduled a meeting with this branch chief at a program office, and I'm going to go in and talk with them 2 weeks from now. And I always schedule farther out for a program office so I can really prepare. But what I will do then is follow back up, maybe the next day even, and say, hey, I'm glad we got it scheduled. Can I take 5 minutes really quick of your time and ask you a couple of quick questions to make sure I'm very prepared coming into our meeting? What I really want to know is I'm going to come in and talk about data, right? Data at a whole level. You know that as the agenda because that's what I've already asked of you. What's 2 or 3 things that keep you awake at night related to data in your agency or in your office, right? What are 2 or 3 goals you might have? And I don't need to discuss them now, but if you can kind of just rattle them off, it helps me really come in prepared to talk to your needs and your challenges and not just ramble on about features. When I talk about this, when I reach out and I ask for this from a branch chief, like the person I scheduled a meeting for, they'll appreciate the fact that I'm doing effort. They will give me the answers. And now I'll be able to come in way more prepared. And so let me talk about the value here very quickly. The value is I can turn that cold call into a warm, right? And you can watch training number 83 to learn more about how to do that. But I just warmed that person up before I even got there by meeting for 5 minutes in a pre-meeting. I can have a much better understanding before I go in, like I just said. I'll be able to write better questions, right? When I prepare my call plan and I'm going to prepare problem and implication questions, I can have them better prepared, aligned to his challenges or his goals. And the last thing is, if I'm meeting with subordinates or direct reports, I can have borrowed trust from the meetings that I had with them. When I meet with John, I can say, hey, I met with Sarah, his direct report, and she was talking about this, and I thought that was a great thing for us to talk about. Well, now John's giving me a little bit of borrowed credibility because I met with Sarah. And so these are things to just keep in mind. So we're down to the wire. We talked pretty fast, or I talked pretty fast. In this training, we talked about how to have successful sales calls in federal agency program offices. And the biggest thing I want you to remember and to measure yourself against is, are you having successful sales calls that are moving the sale forward, or are you having great calls? You want to have more successful calls, right? Okay, so if you like today's training, please tell a friend. Remember, government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process is having a great weekend. I hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you in the next training.